You are listening to the ATM Marketplace podcast. Fiserv enables financial institutions worldwide to create and deliver financial services experiences in step with the way people live and work today. For 35 years, Fiserv has been a trusted leader in financial services technology, helping FIs achieve best-in-class results by driving quality and innovation in credit and debit solutions, ATM and network management, risk and compliance, and insights and optimization.
Hello and welcome to this ATM Marketplace podcast, Making the Case for ATM Managed Services. I'm Suzanne Cluckey, your host for the podcast. ATM Marketplace subscribers will find today's topic relevant for a number of reasons, but probably the number one reason is this. While innovation in the ATM industry has introduced new technologies that can increase ATM use and profitability, some of these same technologies are making the management of a fleet of ATMs both more time-consuming and more expensive. And with migration to Windows 10 by January 2020, plus other initiatives, the expense curve will only continue to rise. Today I'll be speaking with Paul Gooch of Fiserv to find out how financial institutions can deploy ATM Managed Services to create a competitive operations advantage by improving customer engagement, increasing ATM use and convenience, and simultaneously reducing ATM operations expense.
Fiserv enables financial institutions worldwide to create and deliver financial services experiences in step with the way people live and work today. For 35 years, Fiserv has been a trusted leader in financial services technology, helping FIs achieve best-in-class results by driving quality and innovation in credit and debit solutions, ATM and network management, risk and compliance, and insights and optimization.
Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thank you.
I know that historically ATM operations have been costly for financial institutions. There's just so much that goes with it, and the cost trend is only to become more expensive. So, with the need to upgrade to Windows 10 now, for instance, by January 2020, how can ATM Managed Services reduce their costs or reduce the financial institutions' costs?
In some cases, it can reduce cost. In other cases, it can't. I think the overlying factor that we need to be looking at is how can managed services assist a financial institution in getting their fleet compliant with the current mandates, and associated with that would be the underlying costs. In most cases, the buying power and the scale that Fiserv, in this case, in our instance, as an example, brings to the table can allow financial institutions to obtain hardware and software at times at a more attractive price than if a financial institution were to engage those vendors one-on-one to make those changes to Windows 10 and get those up done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so you're just saying that you have the scale to be able to manage to reduce some of the costs that individual financial institutions might experience. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the cost is the cost. No matter who does it, it's going to be a cost from the vendors, but our scale gives them more attractive pricing.
Okay, great. Well, tell me what issues typically prompt a financial institution to consider ATM Managed Services?
Yeah, so it's no secret that you should. A lot of institutions try to manage their own ATM fleet with their own internal resources, and at times, not to be talking down, but the matter of fact is they're not really ATM experts in some cases. They are backroom employees that are trying to manage an ATM fleet. Mm-hmm. In this particular case, Fiserv is an example. We are an expert in the ATM fleet management process. So why not pass along that duty to an ATM expert to manage their fleet? In addition to that, we will also make sure that they become compliant with all the regulatory compliances and reduce those headaches for them in managing that fleet. Compliance is by far the major driving factor in a lot of institutions entertaining managed services. And for sure, this program or any managed service program, if it's operated properly, can fulfill those needs at the same time reducing the headache associated with managing an ATM program.
Well, that you said something interesting there that leads right into my next question, which is about operating properly. What makes a successful ATM management program? What should the points of emphasis be?
If you don't mind, I'll go through a few. Making sure that the provider that they choose or are looking for can bring to the table a full compliance package for the institution to make sure their ATM fleet is compliant with not just ADA, but also industry mandates, PCI, etc. Making sure that the provider that they're choosing is vendor agnostic, not tied to a specific vendor. Mm-hmm. Some institutions are vendor specific today, but don't take into account that future acquisitions, so on and so forth, they might acquire a bank that has a different vendor. And at that time, how do they go ahead and roll those into the program? Do they replace them all, or do you have a provider today that can just roll them into your program because they are vendor agnostic? Make sure that the provider passes on all revenue. So from the interchange and surcharge perspective, the financial institution should be able to realize and retain all that revenue from their fleet in a program such as managed services, providing finance options. So in this particular case of a large institution they had the issue of becoming compliant, but from the capital perspective, they weren't really they weren't capable of purchasing all the upgrades and new ATMs. So providers such as Fiserv can provide capital assistance, and financing and capital assistance is a major player for sure. Mm-hmm. Making sure the financial institution retains control and decision-making of the fleet. Even though the provider might be managing the fleet, the ATM is owned still by that ATM or that financial institution. Making sure that they have the decision-making capabilities to guide that provider into telling them how they want their fleet to run, look, feel, etc. Guaranteed SLA. Provider can guarantee them SLAs, and if they don't meet those SLAs, make sure there's penalties associated so that they can realize relief from those non-guaranteed, from the SLAs that weren't met, and provide them with the benefits of the non-SLAs. Industry certified, making sure that the providers are certified within the industry. The auditors are meeting all their PCI mandates, federal commissions, whatever the case might be. Proven track record. This is probably the most important one. References. You know, you sit in front of a financial institution and pitch your capabilities, but the truth is in the actions of the provider. So from the references standpoint, we strongly encourage institutions to do their due diligence and talk to previous institutions that have enrolled in the program and how they feel about the program. So those are probably the major factors that you should consider when choosing a managed service.
Okay, so just to boil that down into the key points, then that would be compliance, flexibility, control of the fleet, references, and was there another that I missed?
I think finance and capital would be another one.
Okay, so those basically 5 points that they need to look out for in a vendor. Okay, great, thank you. So monitoring, I know is well. Let's go back and talk about Fiserv for a second. I know that different managed services providers have different approaches to their programs, and I was kind of curious to know specifically what Fiserv's approach is to managed services.
So the approach from the Fiserv perspective is in managed service is an a la carte solution, ability to pick and choose what features they want, such as cash provisioning. They might only want that on the off-site locations. So a la carte solution and picking and choosing what functionality you want is a key ingredient to the Fiserv solution. In addition to that, we are a one-source solution. So even though we partner with NCR Diebold to do the servicing and Brinks to do the cash provisioning, so on and so forth, we are a one-stop shop. When that financial institution goes in an arrangement with us, the only phone call they need to make is to Fiserv. So Fiserv is the single entity they deal with, and it is managing that whole entire fleet and all the infrastructure associated with that fleet for them. So I think that's kind of unique that we can bring that to the table. In some cases, there are providers out there that have to have a couple of different pieces to that pie, can bring it all under one umbrella and make it an a la carte solution for the providers or for the institutions.
So basically, you're taking on the complexities of ATM operations for the financial institutions so that they can kind of simplify things for themselves.
That's correct. We like to kind of simplify it as an analogy would be a general contractor building a home, and he's taking care of all the key ingredients and providers that need to build that home, taking that headache away from the homeowner in that case, or in this, the financial institution's ATM program manager. They don't have to worry about those day-to-day headaches with all the providers. We're managing all that for them.
Okay, that sounds great. ATM monitoring, I know, is an important consideration, an important part of fleet management. So what are some of the important elements of a monitoring program? And then further to that, what specifically does Fiserv do in terms of ATM monitoring?
If you think of the concept from the ATM Managed Services perspective, technically, the financial institution shouldn't even have to worry about monitoring the ATMs because the providers, such as Fiserv in our case, should be managing, monitoring, taking action on any instances or occurrences of issues that are out there. And what we recommend for any other provider is to make sure the financial institution has some kinds of check and balance into that provider. In our case, they have full availability to what we call device manager. Then the status of their whole fleet, what the status of each ATM is in. If there's any errors on those ATMs, they can drill down, and they can also do historical drill downs for that fleet in itself. So that's their way of keeping an eye on us to make sure that Fiserv, in our case, is actively working an instance of a dying ATM and what the current status of that is. Transition period is the servicer en route, is the servicer there, so on and so forth. So I think a key ingredient is the checks and balances, and we do provide that with the device manager tool as the true eyes and ears, real time, and we also offer a dedicated program manager to that institution, and their job is nothing more than to watch and maintain that fleet and coordinate any changes necessary for that fleet, such as a new install, remove an ATM, whatever the case might be.
Okay, so yeah, just because a financial institution, turns over the management of its ATM fleet, that doesn't mean it ceases to be concerned about the channel and how it reflects on the financial institution. So I can see how that assured accountability would be really important to the financial institution. Yeah, definitely. All right. So what would you advise a financial institution that it currently is kicking around the idea of turning over its fleet to a managed services provider? What should their thinking be in that sense?
They obviously need to entertain multiple providers. And before I would go into that and into those discussions with the providers, I would probably try to have them understand what their strategy and goal is for the outcome. In some cases, that might be simple. I just need to get my fleet updated to meet Win 10 in this case for January 2020. I need to get out of envelope technology, and I want to get into full deposit automation. So understanding their strategy, direction they want to go, and what they want to accomplish by getting into managed services would probably pretty much direct them into how they want to start engaging and telling the providers that they bring in where they want to go. Because I know when we go in on engagements at Fiserv, it's imperative for us to understand what is your end goal, because then we could put a package together that best suits your needs, and we don't have to worry about coming back and saying, well, we should have done this, so on and so forth. So preparation is key in making sure you understand the customer strategy, where they want to go, and what the timeline is for that whole integration into a managed service proposal or solution. Then vet out the different proposals that they're getting from the individual that they contact for the providers, and then make a great business decision on their needs and that best fits their needs.
You had mentioned Windows 10, and I was just kind of curious, are you seeing a lot of interest in managed services as Windows 10 comes closer for some financial institutions? Are they sort of maybe more seriously considering a managed program?
Absolutely. There's no doubt. If you looked at the history of managed services and going back since Alon was doing this in 2005, and you would look at if you mapped out or graphed out the engagement interest, you would definitely see a spike on the chart. Time periods of ADA, this is after triple DES really, ADA, any of the compliance, Windows XP to Windows 7, now Win 7 to Win 10, so you would definitely see a spike there. So there's no doubt that Win 10 is generating a ton of interest at this point for managed services, without a doubt.
And is that something where a managed services provider can go in, kind of consult with a bank to determine what they need to do to come up to compliance with Windows 10?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'll just share with you what we do at Fiserv, if you don't mind. And this
Sure.
is something I highly recommend to the financial institutions as well that are entertaining this. When we go into an engagement and we look at managed services, the first thing we do is audit their ATM fleet. And we try to understand what their core processors are, what their memory size is, so on and so forth. At that point in time, we could then come to the table with them and make multiple recommendations. We could say to them, you have an older NCR here, a Personas as an example, that is not capable of going Windows 10, so you have no choice but to replace this ATM if you want to get to Windows 10. In another example, you might have an NCR 6600 that doesn't have the proper core. It needs the S-dual core upgrade, so we would recommend to them, in this particular case, you can't upgrade that ATM by replacing it with an S-dual core and potentially upgrading your memory. So we put in front of the client multiple options for either upgrades and replacements, and in some cases, even if it can be upgraded, if it's an older 6600 as an example, we would still maybe recommend a replacement, because in today's age of ATMs and the complexity that they have, we try to recommend to financial institutions to be on a 5 to 7 year cycle on replacements of their ATM fleet. The days of the 80s and 90s where you used to be able to keep an ATM in the wall for 15 years is going away very fast.
Mm-hmm.
So we are at the point now where we recommend a 5 to 7 year depreciation cycle, and we would bring to the table for a financial institution all the proposals that we feel they should be considering, including replacements, upgrades, so on and so forth, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks. I know that will be helpful to a lot of institutions that are now looking at Windows 10 and kind of scratching their head and wondering how they approach this. It's kind of good to know that somebody has the capacity, and the experience out there, because each institution is just kind of its own entity, and you have, I'm guessing, a world of experience with different financial institutions, seeing what their needs have been in terms of making arrangements for Windows 10.
Yes, and if I may add too, when we go into those engagements, we actually do a little more deeper dive with them, and I'll try to explain. When you're trying to make a decision on whether to replace or upgrade an ATM, and even though an ATM might be capable of being upgraded, we also make them take into consideration some factors such as, what's the transaction volume of that ATM? Is it one of your highest transaction volume ATMs? If it is, you want to lean to replacement versus upgrade. Is it a dog ATM? Is it constantly having issues for you? Is it one of your highest failure ATMs, so on and so forth? You might want to consider replacement versus upgrade. So we kind of build with them a scoring system on their fleet based on criteria such as those two and some others. And when we get to that scoring system, then they have a better idea. Okay, I know I have to make a decision whether to replace or upgrade here. this is scoring pretty high on the upgrade or on a replacement scale, so I'm just going to go ahead and replace that ATM.
Yeah, being able to apply a number to it, I would think would make the decision a lot more pragmatic for a bank, and takes all of the the kind of questioning, not all, but a lot of the questioning out of whether that ATM is up for a replacement or not.
Correct.
So, tell me what value-added services a managed service provider might be able to offer a financial institution in addition to just operating the fleet.
I think that there's opportunities here for a lot of institutions to get into enhanced functionality. As an example, we see a lot of institutions that go into this and say, okay, it's time for me to dip my toe into deposit automation. I've been living in this envelope world forever. I think as part of the value add to the proposal, I could factor in my upgrade to newer technologies within the cost of this ATM Managed Services program over the 5 to 7 year lifespan of the contract. There's a lot of other enhanced feature functionalities that can be available too when you're launching into the program. And the reason for that is the image that we use at Fiserv, as an example, is a single image that has the capacity in it to offer a lot of these enhanced functionalities, so you don't have to pick and build a new image on each ATM based on the enhanced functionality they want. So when we install that gold image on an ATM, even though they might not be using the marketing content that we have the capability of offering, that availability is there so that they can turn it on at any time if they choose to do so. So I think the value adds are definitely enhanced functionality, marketing, and the fixed costs, I think, is a key component. It might not be a value add, but from the budgeting perspective, you know what the cost of operating that ATM is going to be over the next 5 to 7 years, with the only exception to that rule being if PCI, as an example, came out with a new mandate such as quad DEDs instead of triple DEDs. We can manage that program for you, but they would have to obviously write a check to fulfill those upgrades to that ATM for that. But knowing the cost, assuming nothing changes over 5 to 7 years, is a definite value add, if you ask me, especially from the budgeting perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see how that would simplify the channel for a bank, not having to worry about whether a machine is going to break down and cause additional maintenance costs, or you get a single number month to month. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, I could see the simplicity in that. So here's your opportunity for a shameless plug, Paul. I wanted to ask you finally how Fiserv's program is different from other managed services programs available, and how does it help the financial institution differentiate itself in a highly competitive market?
Obviously, Fiserv is the leader, or one of the leaders in the fintech industry for ATM driving and processing, for sure. So you're definitely partnering with the leader in the industry. I alluded to this a little earlier. The program is so flexible, but still managed under one umbrella, is probably a differentiator within the industry itself. And that flexibility includes the ability for financial institutions to pick and choose their service providers, as an example. If you engaged into an agreement with Diebold, as an example, you're pretty much fixed into their service and potentially their hardware for the life of that program. In our program, assuming you had a Diebold fleet, we would probably propose to you that we start with Diebold as a service provider, but assuming you have bad service in that area, and there's pockets throughout the country for every vendor where service is good, service is bad, then we could bring to the table a change to that service provider mid-contract, as opposed to if you signed that deal with Diebold, you're locked into that for the life of the contract without paying liquidation costs to get out of that contract. In our particular solution, we give you the ability to change providers, not only from the first and second line service, but also on the cash provisioning side. So there's definite differentiators there. We do not retain any of the revenue from the ATM. We pass all that on 100% surcharge, interchange, so on and so forth to the financial institution. And I think the key ingredient to our program is we have the utmost respect for the brand for that financial institution. We understand that if that cardholder walks up to that ATM and that ATM is not working, the financial institution is on the hook for that. It's not Fiserv. The cardholder doesn't know that Fiserv is managing that ATM, and we make sure we understand and respect the brand for those financial institutions to make sure their ATM fleet is up and running and is capable of servicing their cardholders as complete as possible without impacting their cardholders.
Well, that sounds like a pretty clear differentiation from a lot of service providers. So I really appreciate you giving me that look into it. So to kind of recap, what a financial institution should be looking for, it would be control and flexibility, compliance, financing, and references. Correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so those are the big five, let's call them. And then in terms of what it does for the financial institution, it sounds like it really kind of takes that load off of them and just kind of lets their staff get on with doing the day-to-day business of banking instead of device management.
That is so true. You when you talk to references, especially from the Fiserv perspective, one of the overwhelming kudos that they'll give you is the fact that they have now the time to concentrate. Their employees that were running their ATM program now have the time to concentrate on their core business duties and not worry about managing an ATM fleet for that institution. So there's no doubt that is a contributing, one of the major reasons why people will give you kudos for the managed program.
Great. Well, Paul Gooch, I want to thank you so much for your time today and for this great conversation. I look forward to talking to you again further.
I thank you and have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.